Welcome to another book video. This is my June books review, and I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the month of June. I'm very excited because I also got a mic, so I hope that this makes the audio better for all 10 of you that are going to watch this, maybe even less. For the one person who might be watching this, I hope the audio is great for you. The first book that I want to talk about is called A Gentleman in Moscow, and I borrowed this from my friend Mark. I have the hardcover version. This was written by Amor Towles. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and it came out in 2016. And I thought this book was basically a Wes Anderson film in novel form. It is about this count, this aristocrat. His name is Alexander Rostov, and the book spans multiple decades of history. So we start out in 1922, where the count has been sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life in a hotel, the Metropole to be exact. There's a lovely cast of characters, kind of a motley crew, and throughout the years that he spends at the hotel, he kind of creates this core band of friends. In particular, there is an actress who's also his lover. Her name is Anna Urbanova. And then in particular, it's really important the friendship that he makes with this young girl named Nina, who later on grows up and has a daughter of her own who she has to abandon, and the Count essentially adopts as his own. The best way I can describe this book is that it really is just like a Wes Anderson film, and by that I'm specifically mostly thinking about the Grand Budapest Hotel. And I think it just creates that same air of magic and that atmosphere of wonder and fantasy almost. The novel really kind of indulges that itch for nostalgia, and also kind of that nostalgia for respectability and the education and the manners of the aristocratic class. What's special about this book are some of the really heartwarming vignettes that become heartwarming and come together because the characterization and the character sketches are done so well. There's definitely pain and heartbreak in the story, but in terms of the feelings I felt while reading it, it was mostly lovely and delightful. My favorite part of this book was definitely the Count's cheeky internal dialogue. Unassumingly just drops nuggets of wisdom, or, he just refers to things as if they're indisputable facts or very self-evident, and you just come to really love how cheeky he is about it, I think. One of the key themes, at least that the novel plays on or uses, is how comforting it is that even though the world is changing so much, changing so quickly and quite wildly almost, the refined manners and processes and etiquette and language and culture almost of a hotel like the Metropole stays the same. Similar to the gentleman who's under house arrest there. This would just be the perfect book. I've been to Russia twice, and I've been to Moscow each time, and this would just have been the perfect book to read while you're there. And I would love, if I go to Russia for a third time, to at least spend one night in the Metropole having read this. I'm going to rate this a 4 out of 5. I think my ratings are pretty meaningless, but I still want to do it because I think it gives people an idea of whether you guys should read the book or not, or how much I liked it. I think in my first couple of videos I was skewing quite high, but it's kind of just what I feel in the moment. So I really did enjoy reading this book. I think it's a fun and easy read, particularly if you like Wes Anderson films and you like, kind of novels that take place in a historical context. The next book I want to talk about is called Others Is Not a Race. It's by Melissa de Silva. This is part of my one book a month on Singapore that I'm reading, and this is on a topic that I'm very interested in, which is race. Specifically, it's about Eurasians in Singapore, which is a group I didn't really know that much about, but as someone, I guess, who's of Chinese ancestry and also half Caucasian, it's interesting to me. This volume came out in 2017. It's a collection of oral history, personal stories, recipes, short stories as well. There's some fiction in here, all around kind of Melissa's journey towards rediscovering and also rebuilding her connection with being Eurasian. From the introduction, there's a really great explanation of who Eurasians are. So apologies for reading, but I think this is just the most succinct way to kind of convey this information. A Eurasian is someone with both Asian and European ancestry. Many Singaporean Eurasians trace their heritage to European colonization in Asia, first of the Portuguese back in the 1500s in Malacca, Sri Lanka, Goa, and Timor, then the Dutch in Malacca, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, and finally the British. Each successive wave of colonial powers resulted in Eurasian children from unions of the Europeans with Asian women. Bonded by the common religion of Christianity, generally Catholicism, and the shared language of English, the Portuguese-Eurasians, Dutch-Eurasians, and British Eurasians in the Malayan region found it natural to intermarry. Over time, these diverse Eurasians drew together to form their own distinctive community. Their common experience of having both European and Asian ancestry, their unique position of straddling two cultures while ostensibly belonging to neither, was an important factor prompting them to come together as a cohesive group. According to the 2010 census, Eurasians comprised 0.4% of the Singaporean population, or 15,581 people in total classified themselves as Eurasians. Unlike the Indians, Malays, and Chinese, which have their own category under Singapore's multicultural policy known as CMIO, Eurasians are classified under the category Others. This category used to refer predominantly to the Eurasians, but in recent times, the Others category has expanded to include new citizens who do not fit into the categories of Indian, Malay, or Chinese, such as Filipinos, Caucasians, Africans, and Japanese. As a result, Eurasians now find themselves in the same group of citizens who are not perceived as Singaporean from birth, and this situation has bred further issues of identity for the Eurasian community, especially how they are perceived by other Singaporeans. In Singapore, the thinking around race is quite different than in the US, in the sense that there is this racial framework, CMIO, Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others, that does serve as the structure for how people are classified and how race is dealt with in Singapore. So Eurasians are really a micro-minority in Singapore. I think there is an underlying sense of fear, like I could feel it, that Melissa is worried that because Eurasians are a micro-minority, that the culture and the heritage is going to disappear and it's going to go extinct. And I also got the sense of anxiety almost around the fact that Eurasians are not recognized as an identity, as its own distinct group by the Singapore state, by Singaporeans, by Singapore society. And I really feel like it came across that she felt like she had something to prove, that she is Singaporean and that Eurasians deserve to be treated as the same, category as Chinese, Malays, and Indians. And throughout this volume, what she's doing is, she's kind of arguing that case, and she's trying to say that the culture is valuable in itself and that this is a unique heritage and this is a tangible thing that should be recognized as such. And B, she also is conserving it herself, like through the recipes that she's collected and the oral histories that she's gathered, and even just telling about her own journey of how she's trying to become closer to her heritage. She's doing the act of preserving it and trying to have a record of it, both for herself but also for, I think, the larger community. Honestly, at the end of the day, my philosophy is that heritage and tradition and culture is an active process, and so long as you put in the effort to building those connections with what you perceive to be your culture and your personal history, that is heritage and that is tradition. I don't really think it's something that's passively passed down, although that's definitely a question that I thought about in reading this, because I think Melissa perhaps feels that, especially in Singapore, what it means to have your heritage is to speak the language or to know how to make the dishes of that community. And because Eurasians are such a small portion of the population here, she really didn't have much exposure, except for in her immediate family, to those traditional indicators of culture and heritage. And so I think even though she maybe rejects that in her own process of just actively excavating her own historical background, she still buys into the underlying assumption that, you know, in order to truly be Eurasian, you should learn Kristang. And I don't think that that's something she would say about other people, but for herself, you can see it's very clear that in order for her to feel Eurasian and connected to her heritage, she wants to learn her mother tongue, which is Kristang. Kristang is this, I think it's a pidgin language. It's essentially a Creole, maybe a Creole language of Portuguese, but also local dialects that was created over centuries by Eurasians, and it's a dying language. I think very few people speak it, and so she also, one of several of the personal stories in this book are about her efforts to learn Kristang. I related to a lot of this, and parts of it felt very authentic in the sense that I really could feel her genuine interest and her genuine work that she was doing to build a relationship with her heritage and her historical community and her people. I mean, it is her people. And I relate to that in the sense that I think it does require time and it requires learning and seeking out some of that stuff. But at other times, I also felt that it kind of almost even veered into fetishization of heritage. It almost seems like she was overvaluing the power that having a Eurasian identity could give her. And I don't want that to come across as a judgment, because it's also something that I have felt the inclination to do. And I think as a mixed race person, that's something that I've always thought about is clearly nationality is the top layer of my identity. I'm American, and I think the most obvious indicators of my identity come from my nationality as an American. But when you're talking about racial ethnic identity, you know, am I Chinese? Am I Asian American? Am I white? Especially because I'm white passing. When you're talking about privilege and racism in the US, I think I'm white. But I can understand her desire and her longing to want to really feel like she has an identity that's racial ethnic and she has an identity that's cultural, because I also have kind of felt like I was in a gray area personally. But she's definitely in less of a gray area than I am, because she has multiple generations of Eurasian, like this distinct, even though it's mixed, it's distinctive, and it is capital E Eurasian. And you can tell from the intro that I gave, it has centuries of legacy and history. It has its own customs, it has its own cuisine, it has its own language even. So she definitely has she definitely has a well-defined identity and heritage that she's striving towards. But I kind of get the feeling that she feels, at least for herself personally, that she would be missing out on something or less than if she didn't have that identity that she could point to. And while I do definitely think, obviously, building your identity is extremely self-enriching and self-actualizing and really satisfying, I wouldn't want to feel that if I didn't have that identity, I couldn't also be happy. And I'm not saying that she's saying that, but I kind of felt it a little bit, that she felt like Chinese, Malays, and Indians in Singapore have such well-defined and rich and whole histories and traditions and culture that they don't have to explain and they don't have to educate people on, because they're just there and they're just recognized by everyone. And she doesn't feel that about Eurasians. Honestly, when I'm talking about her, I'm really almost talking about myself, because I am thinking, like, should I hold the banner high of being half Asian? I don't know. I've never really felt like a strong desire to do that. And in today's atmosphere, it just seems self-serving, because I've definitely been treated as a white person my whole life. But I definitely relate to her longings of wanting a very set and externally recognized identity, partly because of, here's a passage that I really resonated with, which has happened to me all the time. She's talking about taking a cab ride to the Eurasian Center. Anyway, this is a conversation that she has with a taxi uncle, and the uncle says, "Miss, you are what, ah?" Like asking, "What are you?" And she says, "I've moved beyond my teenage belligerence when I would either not acknowledge they were referring to my race or retort, 'human.' I don't even roll my eyes anymore, even in my head. I think I've come a long way." Eurasian. What is Eurasian? People who are mixed, Europe people and Asia people mixed together. Oh, like Gurmit Singh, is it? Which is a Chinese Indian comedian in Singapore. So, yeah, I mean, all the time in China, not in the US, of course. When I was living in Beijing, everyone would always ask me, like, what are you? And they would think that I'm from Xinjiang, and they would think I was a Uyghur. And I think partly because I spoke pretty good Chinese, they would be kind of taken aback, like, why does this foreigner speak good Chinese? But, you know, at the end of the day, I was never Chinese to them, ever. Like, not one single person in China would ever consider me Chinese in the racial ethnic sense. And just constantly being asked, like, what are you? Not that it's some kind of trauma or anything, but it just helps me really relate to the longing that she feels, because I felt that same longing of, like, not having, like, if I could just say I'm Eurasian, that would even be a step further, I think, in Singapore, because at least some people have heard of that as an identity and a group, whereas, you know, for me, it's just facts. Like, I'm American, but my mother's Chinese. I grew up in the US, but I speak good Chinese because, like, I've studied it my whole life, you know? The main feeling I get from reading this, though, is that sense of fear and anxiety. The last story is a sci-fi story, and it's the last two Eurasians on the planet. And the guy, the main character in the short story, puts out a classified saying, "I'm a Eurasian looking for the only other Eurasian." And you can just feel, it's not a very good short story, no offense, like, the prose is a little bit heavy-handed and forced. The second Eurasian that the guy meets in this short story is married to a Filipino woman, and in Singapore you have to register your race on your identity card, and the guy asks him, "Why did you register your children as Filipinos and not as Eurasians?" And the guy responds, "Don't you see, I don't have anything Eurasian to give them. At least my wife has a whole bloody country full of culture. Those people have songs, they've got stories, a language, so many dishes, their names make my head spin. The boys inherit all of that." And that's why I kind of feel like I don't want it to be a prison for her. Like, just because, but maybe I'm projecting myself onto this author, because I don't have, like, a mixed history to, like, you know, pull from. I have, China, I guess, and, like, the US, which is great. They both have, like, their own traditions and cultures. But something about feeling that being Eurasian is less than because the Philippines has, like, real proper culture and heritage, I don't feel like that's fully accurate. And I think you make what you want to call your heritage and your culture. And plus, the people that have really strong culture or heritage, those are, like, tradition people to begin with, meaning, like, to pass down traditions takes a lot of time and effort. Like, making these dishes takes forever, and I think there are tons of people from these countries that don't spend all the time to do these traditional things, especially nowadays when everything is so industrialized and commercialized. It's not like people are sitting around and making quays from scratch. I mean, some people are, and I definitely think there's inherent value in that. But there's some sense of this anxiety that doesn't really sit well with me, because I feel like it's because Eurasians are a micro-minority, and because she isn't able, because it doesn't have like such wide awareness, I guess what I don't like about it is it's really depending on other people to feel connected to the heritage. And I think when it's her own personal journeys and her own experience of rediscovering these recipes and taking down oral histories of her family members, that is heritage. Like, that is culture, and that is what you're creating. And I don't think it really matters what other people view it as. But again, I think that's hypocritical, because I do relate to her feeling of longing and wanting acceptance as a racial group. And I think one way that you derive that is by the state recognizing you as Singaporean. And honestly, it's very hypocritical of me, because I think if I were her, I would feel exactly the same way. I would feel like I have this long history of culture and heritage, and I am Singaporean. Like, how dare you not put me into the racial framework, because I have been here as long as these other groups, and I am part of this new national identity, new as in relatively new, and like, how dare you say I'm not Singaporean? So I think I am being hypocritical, and I would ultimately agree with her. The last thing I want to talk about, which I also don't have fully formed opinions on whatsoever, but it's just something that really stuck out to me, is she very clearly says that Eurasians come from a history of colonization, and she's even in the intro, it's Europeans came over, they colonized, and they married local Asian women. Its existence is a product of colonization. Tons of things are products of colonization, so that's definitely not the most illuminating comment to make, but specifically like the white man and the Asian woman and the colonizer and the local, the fact that the heritage or the history of a group is inextricably tied to like this very visual manifestation of colonization. I wonder if someone has written a paper on that. I would love to read it. For this book, I'm going to give a 4.4. I think it sparked a lot of thoughts. The personal stuff aside, I also like really appreciated learning more about race in Singapore and this micro minority, and it definitely will inspire me or motivate me to maybe like maybe go to the Eurasian Community Club in Singapore, or definitely try some of this food. The next book I want to talk about is called So You Want to Talk About Race. It was written by Ijeoma Oluo in 2018, and it's a really great primer, I think, for white people essentially to learn how to talk about race in the US. There are around 15 chapters, and she spends each chapter opening up first with kind of a personal story to really introduce the topic, but then defining key terms and key phrases so that the reader can educate him or herself on what these things are. And then finally, she has a few bullet points for action items and also tips and tricks for how to improve moving forward. She definitely explains what systemic racism is. I think by now we all know that when we say racism or racist, we're referring to systemic racism. And maybe you can be prejudiced against white people, but you can't really be racist against white people, because racism refers to an entire system of oppressive structures that have been really unfair and horrible to Black people since the founding of our country. She defines what intersectionality is. She looks at police brutality. She talks about privilege and defines what privilege is and how to check your privilege. There's a chapter about affirmative action. There is a chapter about cultural appropriation, microaggressions. She also talks about the model minority myth, which obviously is related to Asian Americans. And she also has a chapter on why I can't use the N-word and why I don't want you to touch my hair. For me, it was pretty level 100. I don't think there was anything in the book that I hadn't already heard about or I didn't already agree with. I think I'm learning about myself that once I feel that I know the basics or the general principles, or once I feel that I already agree with what your basic underlying message is, I really like to go much deeper. And I think I'll follow this up with some standalone books on some of these topics. For example, I really want to read The Color of Money, which is about access to the financial system in the US. And this book also doesn't cover housing policy at all. So it doesn't cover like financial services or like the financial system or housing policy. I think it's really more geared towards topics that might come up on social media. Like if you're going to argue with someone on Facebook, you might argue about these topics. But I do think she picked the right topics for what she was trying to do, which is create a primer on some of these issues and also empower white people to talk about them. In the current iteration of capitalism, there are a lot of losers, and it's a very zero-sum mindset. So the scarcity mindset concept, and then also the fact that meritocracy in our country is a myth, and the idea that if you just work really hard, you'll get what you deserve, and there are no other external dynamics at work there, is a myth, I think. So the intersection of systemic racism, the scarcity mindset that has been bred by our version of capitalism, and the meritocracy myth, I think intersect in extremely interesting and important ways. She talks about this idea in her chapter on privilege, and she says that the reason white people get so defensive when they're told to check their privilege is because we are born into this system where when someone else gets more, that means we're getting less. And I think that's a really key principle to understand if you're going to try to really truly unpack the impacts of systemic racism. I did find the chapter on the school to prison pipeline to contain some new material for me. So I'll just read a statistic that I found really shocking. Black students make up only 16% of our school populations, and yet 31% of students who are suspended and 40% of students who are expelled are Black. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than white students, and 70% of students who are arrested in school and referred to law enforcement are Black. In the 2011 to 2012 school year alone, 92,000 students were arrested. Yeah, and she makes a really good point. Like, most public school teachers in the US are white women, which in itself is not a problem, obviously, but they're not really, they don't have the tools, and they definitely have certain biases that allows them to interpret the activity of Black kids as aggressive or violent or threatening, and the fact that Black children are arrested and sent to special education tracks and overall punished at rates much higher than white kids, I think reflects that. Overall, I will give this book a 4 out of 5. I think it's a great primer. It's a great starter pack. If I have someone who doesn't already agree with me on racism in the US, I would offer this as the first step to trying to get them to see my side and to see her side. And I'm glad I read it. The last book I want to talk about is incredible. It is called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I'm sure loads of you have already read this. The name comes from a poem by Yeats, which is beautiful. I'm going to read it to you guys because I think it's so moving. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. So good. Chinua Achebe is from eastern Nigeria. He was born in 1930. He published this in 1958. This book takes place in the mid-19th century, and it follows a main character named Okonkwo, And he is well known throughout his village, which is called Umuofia, which is actually a cluster of 9 villages on the lower Niger, the river. He's well known in his village for being an amazing wrestler. He came from very humble beginnings because his father always had very poor harvests. This is an agricultural society, I guess, or agrarian. The main thing that they do is they raise yams, or they farm yams. And it follows his story over several years. The main kind of plot point that happens is he accidentally kills one of the clansmen. The clansmen are like the elders who also oversee disputes, and they administer justice through these trials that they have. He accidentally kills one, so he is banished to his mother's homeland for 7 years. And when he finally returns back to his village after that amount of time, missionaries have settled in, and they have already gathered some converts, and the colonial administrative system is also being set up. So the colonial governor, I guess, is also starting to set up a town. In some ways, the village and the village life is much more advanced than I think we are led to believe in traditional literature and portrayals of African societies. They have religion, they have courts where they administer justice, as I just mentioned, but in some ways, it's still a pretty horrible society to live in if you are an outcast or if you are a woman. Oh my goodness, the gender roles in this novel are through the roof. Like, even the crops, there's like a manly crop and a womanly crop, and you best believe that if anything is soft or weak, it's womanly, and if it's brave or courageous, it's manly. So I think that's one of the key insights of the book, is that this is not a primitive or savage society, even though it does have its faults. And I think the reason that Christianity was able to take hold is some of the initial converts were those outcasts. Okonkwo is definitely an archetype in the sense that he represents everything that's grand and courageous and noble about this society, but that ultimately leads to his downfall and also the downfall of Umuofia. He is the embodiment of toxic masculinity. I read this book with my book club, and we kind of discussed that it wasn't so much that he cared about the collective, it was more that the collective allowed him to shine as an individual. And so I do think he very much saw himself as a maverick and as kind of the strongest leader and the deserved leader of this society. I feel like a lot of times we view colonization as a very linear process. This book shows that it's multiple forces that kind of come together. I mean, the title is Things Fall Apart, which hints at the idea that it's not something linear and intentional, but rather kind of a swirling and a culmination of multiple dynamics that just unleash this undoing. If it had been an intentional attack, they may have been able to defeat it, because this is a brave society, and it's a society that values masculinity, and it's a society that values hierarchy and strict adherence to a certain code of customs. And if it had been something so blatant and straightforward as a attack, like a military attack, or even something more concrete, they definitely were strong enough to fight back. But rather it was kind of the existing fault lines in their society and the way that Christianity was introduced and then leveraged by the colonial administrators that made it a more diffused threat. And that's part of why they weren't able to overcome it, because it was almost, they weren't able to identify it as a threat fully. The writing is just beautiful. It's so economical, but so evocative at the same time. This writing is just gorgeous, and being able to use such few words and such plain words to create such a deep narrative as well as deep emotions in the reader is truly magic and like really amazing. Chinua Achebe is definitely a neutral narrator. The irony is biting and subtle, but it really packs a punch. That tone really culminates to an amazingly gut-wrenching ending, and I think the way that he's built up, oh, I'm gonna cry, it's just so good. The way that he's built up these characters and their relationship to the society and the customs and the daily everyday actions that they go through really builds up to be more than just a sum of the parts. I am going to give this book a 4.7 out of 5. If you haven't read this book, you should read it. It's so short and it's so good. I might be able to track her down. Well, we're not really like meeting strangers during coronavirus, but it's the special. What's special? What he also forms deep friendships with